Turning points in U.S. history. Women's suffrage movement. Veronica Wilkins. Chapter 1. Seneca Falls. On July 19, 1848, around 300 women and men met in a church. It was in Seneca Falls, New York. They spoke about women's rights and suffrage. This is the right to vote. At the time, only men could vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott led the meeting. They wanted a say in the country's laws, but to have that, they needed to vote. So they fought for suffrage. We call these women suffragettes. There is a label that says Elizabeth Cady Stanton and points to her picture. Many women during this time stayed home. Their job was to care for children. Their husbands worked. Some women, like Stanton and Mott, were active in politics. They fought against slavery. They learned to speak to crowds. They learned to write well. U.S. slavery ended after the Civil War, which was from 1861 to 1865. Women began using what they learned to fight for suffrage. Many women's clubs formed in the late 1800s. These groups educated women. Some worked to change laws. A ban on alcohol was one. As these groups grew, more women joined suffrage groups too. And here is a caption, Women's Club. Chapter 2, Working for Change. Women protested. They marched on foot through the streets. Some rode horses. They held signs. Some decorated cars. They even wore costumes. The first march was in 1910. People watched marches. Newspapers wrote about them. The marches grew. In 1913, around 8,000 women marched in Washington, D.C. In 1915, 40,000 women marched in New York City. And the caption says, Washington, D.C. March. Suffragettes campaigned. How? They wrote newspapers. They gave out flyers. They spoke out too. They talked to politicians. They gave speeches. They gave reasons for women's suffrage. The text box says, what do you think? Susan B. Anthony was a famous suffragette. She talked a man into letting her vote. She was arrested. Would you have done this? Why or why not? And there's a label showing a flyer someone is handing out. Suffragettes campaigned in each state. Why? States could make their own laws. Their work paid off in Wyoming first. The territory gave women the right to vote in 1869. In 1916, the first woman was elected to Congress. Her name was Jeannette Rankin, and there is a label pointing to her, Jeannette Rankin. Take a look. Women first won suffrage in Wyoming. Many states followed. What year could women vote in your state? So let's look. Our state is Wisconsin, so it's purple, or actually this dark blue. Women in Wisconsin were not allowed to vote until 1920, 100 years ago. Chapter 3, Suffrage is Won. World War I, from 1914 to 1918, called many men to war. Women filled the jobs they left behind. This helped suffragettes. How? It showed that women cared for their country just as men did. But there was still work to do. Protests continued. Suffragettes picketed the White House. Many were arrested, and there's a label pointing to the White House. Finally, the president helped. Woodrow Wilson asked Congress to change the law. This was on September 30th, 1918. It took nearly 2 years, but the law changed. The 19th Amendment was passed on August 18th, 1920. It said women could vote. The text box says, "Did you know President Wilson was not the first man to help? Men were at Seneca Falls. Suffragettes' husbands helped. There was a men's league for women's suffrage." And there's a caption for the photo that says, "Passing the 19th Amendment." Women fought for suffrage for more than 70 years. Their work changed America forever. Today, women have had the right to vote for about 100 years. In fact, this is our anniversary, 100 years this year. Many women work in government too. In 2018, a record was set. The most women ever were elected to Congress. The text box says, "What do you think? Women fought for a voice in politics. What if they hadn't done this? How would it feel if you did not have a voice?" And the label for the photo, or the caption for the photo, says female Congress members. All the women who were elected to be in the United States Congress in 2018. Quick facts and tools. Here is a timeline. Timeline begins with July 19th, 1848. The Seneca Falls Convention takes place as the first women's rights convention. Next date on the timeline is December 6, 1868. The 13th Amendment abolishes or ends slavery. So here's the end of slavery. And with the end of slavery came the right of African American men to vote, not women, just the men. December 19th, December 10th, 1869, the territory of Wyoming allows women to vote, so just in Wyoming. November 5th, 1872, Susan B. Anthony illegally votes in New York. Remember, she gets arrested for doing it because it's against the law. May 21st, 1919, the first women's suffrage march takes place in New York City. Next, October 23rd, 1918, around 40,000 women march for suffrage in New York City. November 7th, 1916, Jeannette Rankin becomes the first woman elected to Congress. September 30th, 1918, President Woodrow Wilson speaks to Congress stating his support for a women's suffrage amendment, giving women the right to vote. August 16th, 1920, the 19th Amendment grants all women the right to vote in every state. August 18th, 2020, that was just a couple months ago, women have been able to vote in the United States for 100 years. And over here we have the glossary. Remember, a glossary is like a dictionary of words that are used in the book. So the first word is arrested. That means stopped and held by the power of law. Campaigned. Conducted a series of connected acts to bring about a certain result. That's the definition of campaigned. Congress. Congress is the lawmaking body of the United States made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives. Picketed. That means protested by walking or standing in front of something. Politics. The activity and discussions involved in governing a country, state, or city. That's politics. Protested. Demonstrated against something. Rights. Things you are legally or morally entitled to do, allowed to do. Slavery. A system in which people are owned by other people and forced to work without any pay. Territory. A territory is an area of the United States that's not part of a state, but has an organized separate government. Vote. To vote is to cast a ballot, making a choice in an election. At the very end, we have the index that lists all the things that you might want to look up in the book and the page number where they appear. And there's even a section called Learn More. That is a place where you could go to get more information about this book.